All right, let's dive in today. And, this one is a little bit different. We're going to be talking about masturbation. We've got to say, when this topic came across my desk, I kind of chuckled. I was like, really? This is what we're going to be deep diving into. But then I started looking into it, and we've got some interesting source material here, including this podcast, The Denial and Jessika Show. And I got to say, it's fascinating stuff. One of the things that really stood out to me right off the bat was this statistic that over 90% of men and 75% of women masturbate regularly. I mean, those are huge numbers. So why is it that this is still such a taboo subject?
Yeah, it is interesting, isn't it? I mean, if you look at those numbers, we're talking about something that is incredibly prevalent. But it's surrounded by this stigma, this kind of like a cloud of shame almost. And I think it really gets to the heart of, our complicated relationship with sexuality as a whole and all of these sort of cultural norms and societal norms that we have that often are rooted in believes that view sex outside of procreation as something, negative or to be ashamed of.
Yeah, it's like this big secret, but then you look at the numbers and it's like, wait a minute, almost everybody's doing it. And it's not just about pleasure either, right? Like in the Denial and Jessika show, they actually talk about all of these benefits that kind of go beyond just the feel-good aspect of it. And one of the things they mentioned was like stress relief. What's the connection there?
Well, you have to look at the physiological response that happens when you masturbate because you're triggering the release of all these hormones like dopamine, oxytocin, serotonin, endorphins, all of which are really involved in regulating mood and reducing stress.
So it's like a natural de-stressor.
It really is. If you think about it, like dopamine that's associated with reward and pleasure, so that gives you that immediate feel-good sensation. Oxytocin, sometimes called the cuddle hormone, promotes feelings of bonding and connection, which can be really calming. And then you've got serotonin, which helps regulate mood, sleep, even appetite. So it's contributing to this overall sense of well-being. And then finally, endorphins, which are your body's natural painkillers. They further alleviate stress and create a sense of euphoria.
So it's not just a quick fix, it's actually impacting your brain chemistry.
It really is, yeah.
It's pretty powerful stuff. And I know that they also mentioned in the podcast something about better sleep. Is that related to these same hormones we were just talking about?
It really is. It's all interconnected. That release of those hormones, particularly the oxytocin, not only is it reducing stress, but it also induces this feeling of relaxation and contentment, which can make it easier to fall asleep and stay asleep.
So it's like your body's natural way of winding down.
Exactly.
It's like a built-in sleep aid.
Exactly.
I like that. I like that. Now, another benefit they mentioned in the podcast was sexual awareness. I wasn't really sure what they meant by that. How does masturbation contribute to a better understanding of your own sexuality?
Well, it's all about self-exploration. When you masturbate, you're basically getting to know your own body and figuring out what feels good to you. You're discovering your preferences, your turn-ons, and what really brings you pleasure. And that self-awareness can be incredibly empowering, especially when it comes to partnered sex.
So it's almost like you're doing research for your own pleasure.
That's a great way to put it.
You're learning what works for you so you can communicate that to a partner.
Exactly.
And hopefully have more fulfilling experiences together.
Yeah, and it takes the guesswork out of it. It allows for more open and honest communication about what you enjoy. And it can also help you develop a stronger sense of body confidence and self-acceptance, which can be beneficial in all aspects of life, not just sexually.
Okay, so we've got stress relief, better sleep, increased sexual awareness. Are there any other benefits that we're missing?
Well, there's one that's often overlooked, but it's arguably the most important, and that's safety. Masturbation is hands down the safest form of sexual activity. There's no risk of STIs, no unplanned pregnancies, and no need to worry about consent or boundaries. And the same way you wouldn't have a partner. It's a way to explore your sexuality and experience pleasure without any of those potential risks.
Yeah, that's huge. Especially for, younger people who are maybe just starting to explore their sexuality. It's a risk-free way to kind of experiment and learn about what feels good.
Exactly. It provides that safe space for self-discovery and explanation, without all the pressures and potential consequences that can come with partnered sex. But even for adults, it's important to remember that masturbation is a healthy and valid way to experience sexual pleasure, regardless of relationship status or life circumstances.
So we're talking about a natural stress reliever, a sleep enhancer, a tool for sexual exploration, and the safest form of sexual activity out there. It almost sounds too good to be true. And yet there are so many myths and misconceptions swirling around masturbation. I mean, some of the stuff that Denial and Jessica mentioned on their podcast, I was literally laughing out loud. Blindness, hairy palms. Where do these ideas even come from?
I know it's amazing how these myths have persisted for so long, despite having absolutely no basis in reality. And I think it speaks to that fear and discomfort that often surrounds sexuality. It's easier to spread misinformation and scare tactics than to have open and honest conversations about something that's perfectly natural and healthy.
Yeah, it's like people are grasping at straws to try to control or demonize a behavior that they don't understand or they find threatening. But those are kind of the more outlandish myths. There's another one that I think is a lot more pervasive and potentially harmful, and that's the idea that masturbation can cause erectile dysfunction. I'm sure a lot of our listeners have heard that one before, so can you set the record straight on that one?
Absolutely. That myth needs to be debunked once and for all. The science actually points in the opposite direction. Masturbation, particularly for men, can actually strengthen the pelvic floor muscles, which are essential for maintaining healthy erections.
Wait, so it's more like masturbation is a preventative measure against erectile dysfunction.
In many ways, yes. Think of it like this. When you exercise regularly, you strengthen your muscles. The same principle applies to the pelvic floor. By engaging those muscles during masturbation, you're essentially giving them a workout, improving their tone and function.
So it's like hitting the gym for your sexual health.
Exactly.
I like that analogy, but hold on. Denial and Jessica did bring up an important nuance here. They mentioned that there's a difference between masturbation itself and excessive pornography consumption. Can you elaborate on that a bit more?
Sure. So while masturbation is generally beneficial, excessive reliance on pornography can lead to a phenomenon called desensitization. And this is where your brain becomes so accustomed to the constant stimulation from porn that it starts to require increasingly extreme or novel content to achieve the same level of arousal.
So it's like your brain gets bored with the same old thing.
Right.
And it needs a bigger and bigger hit
Exactly.
to get that same response.
Yeah, and this desensitization can potentially spill over into real-life sexual experiences, making it more difficult to become aroused by your partner or to achieve orgasm.
So it's not that pornography itself is bad or harmful, but rather that excessive consumption can create an imbalance in your brain's reward system, making it harder to appreciate and respond to other forms of stimulation.
Exactly.
It's all about finding that healthy balance and being aware of those potential effects.
Yeah.
All right, so we've covered a lot of ground here, and I'm sure our listeners are finding this deep dive incredibly insightful. But we've got more to uncover, so stay tuned for part 2 of our exploration of masturbation.
Welcome back to our deep dive on masturbation. We've been looking at, how common it is and all the science behind all these amazing benefits like stress reduction, better sleep, and, getting to know yourself better sexually. And we've also started to, debunk some of those crazy myths out there, like, the one about masturbation causing erectile dysfunction.
Yeah, and we were also talking about that difference between just masturbation and, excessive use of pornography and how that can lead to desensitization. You mentioned that this desensitization can kind of impact real-life intimacy with a partner. Can you explain a little more about that?
Yeah, so when you're constantly exposed to those images, especially the kind you see a lot in pornography, it really kicks your brain's reward system into overdrive. It's like flooding your system with dopamine, which is that neurotransmitter that's all about pleasure and motivation. And over time, your brain gets used to that constant dopamine rush, so it starts to need more and more intense stimulation to get that same level of excitement.
So it's kind of like developing a tolerance, almost like what happens with drug use.
Yeah, that's a good way to think about it. And just like with drug tolerance, that desensitization can make it harder to experience pleasure from more subtle or nuanced types of stimulation, like in a real-life intimate situation. You might find it difficult to become aroused by your partner, or you might need more intense or specific types of touch to have an orgasm.
That makes sense. So it's not really that pornography itself is inherently bad or harmful. It's more about that excessive consumption, creating this imbalance in your brain's reward system and making it harder to appreciate those other forms of stimulation. So it's all about finding that healthy balance and being aware of those potential effects.
And it's also about variety.
Okay.
Just like you wouldn't want to eat the same meal every day, right?
Right.
It's healthy to diversify your sexual experiences.
I like that.
That might involve, exploring different types of touch, incorporating some fantasy or role-playing, or even just focusing on that emotional connection with your partner.
Now, speaking of exploring different experiences, the Denial Jessika Show also talked about how masturbation can actually improve your sexual performance, which seems counterintuitive,
It does, doesn't it?
what we often hear.
But it's true. Remember those pelvic floor muscles we were talking about?
Yes.
Well, strengthening them through masturbation can actually give you better control over ejaculation, which can lead to longer-lasting sex.
Oh, so it's like Kegel exercises for your sexual health.
That's a good way to put it.
Okay.
And it's not just about lasting longer. It's about having more control and potentially even more intense orgasms.
Oh, wow.
And there are psychological benefits, too. Masturbation can boost your confidence and help you feel more comfortable with your body and your sexuality. And that self-assurance can translate to greater ease and enjoyment during partnered sex.
Yeah, it's like anything else. The more you practice and the more you get to know your own body, the more confident and skilled you become.
Exactly.
Now, I want to go back to something you mentioned earlier about the safety of masturbation. Denial and Jessica actually said that sometimes doctors recommend masturbation for certain medical conditions. I was surprised by that. Can you tell us more about that?
Absolutely. So while we often think of masturbation, as being about pleasure and release, it can also be used therapeutically. For example, some doctors might recommend regular masturbation for men who have chronic pelvic pain or testicular pain, because the release of muscle tension and endorphins during orgasm can actually help to alleviate the discomfort.
So it's like a natural form of pain relief.
Exactly.
In some cases,
And it shows how connected our physical and mental well-being really are. What we do with our bodies can have a huge impact on how we feel emotionally, and vice versa.
right. We've talked a lot about the physical and physiological aspects of masturbation, but I think it's also important to talk about the emotional side of things. It's not always just about physical pleasure, is it?
No, not at all. It can be tied to all sorts of emotions: curiosity, desire, loneliness, stress, even just boredom. Sometimes it's about seeking comfort or release. Other times it's about exploring fantasies or just enjoying the sensations.
And I imagine those emotions can be amplified if you've grown up feeling ashamed or hearing negative messages about masturbation.
Definitely. If you've been told that it's wrong or dirty, it can be really hard to shake off those feelings, even if you know intellectually that it's healthy and normal.
Right.
And that's why self-compassion is so important. It's about acknowledging those feelings without judging yourself and reminding yourself that you deserve to experience pleasure and explore your sexuality without shame.
Self-compassion and acceptance, those are such powerful tools for navigating any aspect of life, especially something as personal and often stigmatized as masturbation. Okay, so I think we've done a great job unpacking all the science, the benefits, and some of the emotional complexities around masturbation. But there's one more area I want to talk about before we wrap up. Denial of Jessica talked about the importance of communication and how masturbation can actually improve intimacy in relationships.
Yeah.
So can you explain a little bit more about that?
Welcome back to our deep dive into masturbation. It's been a really interesting conversation so far. We've been talking about masturbation as this kind of solitary thing that we do in private, but it can actually have a big impact on our relationships, both good and bad, depending on how we approach it.
Right. And Denial and Jessica on their podcast, they really emphasize this idea that being open about masturbation with your partner can actually make your relationship stronger. How does that work?
Well, when you think about it, if you're comfortable talking to your partner about what you need and what you desire, including things that you explore through masturbation, it creates this deeper level of intimacy and trust. It allows you both to be more vulnerable with each other, and it opens up this space for understanding and acceptance.
So it's like you're inviting your partner into this more intimate part of your world, even if it's something you experience mostly on your own.
Exactly, and it can lead to a whole new level of exploration and connection in the relationship. Like you might discover that you share certain fantasies or preferences, and that can lead to some pretty exciting and fulfilling sexual experiences together. Or maybe you learn that your partner has some needs or desires that they haven't felt comfortable expressing before, and that can help you both grow and evolve as a couple.
It's like you're taking away the guesswork and just being more honest and open about what you both enjoy. But I imagine that can be a tough conversation for some couples to have, especially if they were raised with a lot of shame or secrecy around masturbation.
Oh, absolutely. It takes courage and vulnerability to break down those barriers. But it's so worth it. Because when you and your partner feel safe and accepted enough to share those intimate parts of yourselves, it can really strengthen your bond in a way that few other things can.
So it's like building this bridge of understanding and empathy, which is valuable not just sexually, but in all areas of your relationship.
Exactly. And let's not forget the practical side of things, too. When you understand your own needs and preferences through masturbation, you can communicate those to your partner much better. And that can lead to more satisfying and fulfilling sexual experiences for both of you.
It's like you're bringing a roadmap to the bedroom. You know where you want to go, and you can help guide your partner along the way.
That's a great analogy. And it really highlights the importance of self-awareness. The more you know about your own body and what brings you pleasure, the better you can communicate that to your partner and create a more mutually satisfying experience.
So it sounds like masturbation can be this powerful tool, not just for personal growth, but also for strengthening relationships. But
Absolutely.
only if we're willing to be intentional about it and to communicate openly and honestly with our partners.
It's about changing the narrative around masturbation, from shame and secrecy to acceptance, exploration, and connection.
It's about reclaiming our right to pleasure and recognizing that masturbation is a natural and healthy part of human sexuality, whether we're single or in a relationship.
You said it perfectly. It's about embracing our sexuality in all its forms, from the solitary to the shared, and finding ways to integrate those experiences in a way that feels authentic and fulfilling.
Wow, what a deep dive this has been. I feel like we've covered so much ground. I really hope that our listeners are leaving with a better understanding of masturbation, not just physically, but emotionally, psychologically, and relationally.
Me too.
It's been great exploring this topic with you.
Likewise.
Well, that's all the time we have for today's deep dive. But before we go, I want to leave you with one last thought. We've talked about all these individual benefits of masturbation, but imagine for a second, what if we could completely shift the way our society views this topic? What if we could let go of all the shame and stigma around masturbation? How might that impact our culture, our relationships, and even our overall well-being as a society? It's something to think about. Thank you for joining us on this incredible journey. We'll see you next time on The Deep Dive.